How come there is no how-to manual to do semiotics? Why can any mark we make convey some meaning to someone? In this fourth omnibus, we'll explore how it all works. Hang on, what do you mean by it? Much like Douglas Adams' answer to the big existential question, is 42, a definitive answer to how semiotic works in practice requires a different question. Let's see how it works. Welcome to the fourth Semiosis 101 Omnibus edition from Season 3. If you've watched the weekly Semiosis 101 episodes before, then you already know I am Dave Wood and I explain Charles Sanders Peirce's semiotic theory of semiosis, sign action, in design-centric terms. In this omnibus, I collect 4 episodes of Semiosis 101 Season 3 into a single edition. These 4 episodes can be watched back to back in this edition on the subject of interpreting semiotic science. Season 3's overall semiotic theme is semiotic encoding, with a focus on how audiences make interpretations. What this season's theme means to you as visual communicators is that at long last you will see what semiotic science can be or will be. For any new viewers joining Semiosis 101, welcome. We will build your confidence to encode semiotic sign action into your own designs or illustrations during your own ideation phase to enhance visual communication. Why do you need Semiosis 101? Peirce's writing and terminology is very obtuse. On Semiosis 101, I translate Peirce's brilliant theory into language creators will understand and can follow. After all, we study design and illustration and not philosophy, so we need theory centered to creators' needs. Yes, that is why you need Semiosis 101. So, subscribe and let's jump straight into interpreting semiotic science, how it all works. To emphasise this semiotic encoding of the possibility of greater meaning, let me quickly refer back to the panda illustration example I used so far. Not to analyse the drawing in semiotic terms, but instead the assumption interpretation that when we see a drawing of a panda, it is a panda. Surely a drawing of a panda is a panda. Some of you may be shouting at me right now, but regular viewers and my students know I am tricksy. So when is a drawing of a panda not a panda? Some of you say when the panda drawing is symbolic of something else, such as the WWF organisation. Here the panda is a logo representing not only the World Wildlife Fund, but all endangered animals. But how else can a panda illustration not be a panda? A drawing of a panda will not be seen as a drawing of a panda if the interpreter does not know what a panda is. To the illustrator or designer who has created the panda drawing, they know what a panda is, what a panda looks like, and so assume the target audience will also recognise the drawing as a panda. But at this stage, semiotically, the interpretation is only a possibility that it will be interpreted as a panda. This is what Peirce means when he frames this interpretive moment as rhematic, a rheme. Semiotically, the lines and shapes that define the shape of the beast are working hard to point the interpreter to the interpretation of panda. These lines and shapes, as we have seen in many previous episodes, are semiotic iconic representations. Iconic representation is the lowest level semiotic coding, the lowest level of semiotic representation of a concept in sign action. In Semiosis 101, I draw the comparison between Peirce's icon to the basic visual building blocks designers and illustrators use. Think of every line, shape, mark, colour, stroke, etc. as a visual communication building block. We are considering here the micro level of how illustrations and designs are created. Composited together, more complex things are created. Each of those micro decisions has the capacity to be semiotically encoded as meaning bearing. How? Consider the black blobs in the drawing, formed in one way to suggest an ear and formed in another way to suggest a leg. A black line stroke in a particular way to suggest a back of an animal. See? You are already semiotically encoding possible interpretation. This happens at the immediate state of effect of this representation on the interpreter. As iconic representation only suggests the possibilities that familiarities could mean something more, the effect on the interpreter of what this something could also be is classed by Peirce as immediate. Let us consider this with an example that is not a panda. I am a Scouser. I am from Liverpool, in England. I am a Scottish citizen. I live and work in Scotland. I am a New Scot. I am a Scout Scot. Get it? Semiosis 101 is a sub-brand of Scout Scot, and Scout Scot's visual identity is of two liver birds against a saltire flag. The liver bird is semiotically symbolic for Liverpool. The saltire is the national flag of Scotland. The saltire is semiotically symbolic for Scotland. The saltire is blue, the birds are red. So let me unpack the visual communication building blocks of Scout Scot's logo. Blue red, white cross on blue, white cross on a blue background, red birds comprised of swirls and shapes. Each of these visual building blocks composed together in a particular order become meaning bearing. In the context of the individual constructed components, they have a contextual meaning. A diagonal cross across a background forms what is described as a saltire. A diagonal white cross across a blue background forms a cross of St Andrew, the patron saint of Scotland. A white and blue saltire like this has the encoded meaning-bearing power of indicating that this is a flag representing the nation of Scotland. So far, so good, we hope. The saltire is internationally recognised as the national flag of Scotland, but certain Spanish municipalities may also lay claim to it. That is the saltire part of the logo. That is the meaning-bearing context that the white cross on blue contributes to Scout Scot. But what are the birds? We can see the liver birds are stylistically constructed with individual visual communication building blocks. But what are they? We can see a shape with two legs, wings, tail, head and beak. This iconically suggests what most of us will recognise as a bird shape. We can say that the immediate effect of seeing all these swirling shapes in this composition suggests a bird shape standing proud with outstretched wings, with, in what we perceive as a beak, another shape which in turn suggests a plant. Well, what could this mean? We can say the immediate effect here is to suggest an interpretation of birds in the interpreter's mind. This is where, semiotically speaking, the interpreter and the creative precariously wobbles. Is it a bird? Is it a particular type of bird? What could it be? Semiotically, if the interpreter arrives at the interpretation of bird, the mark making has had a successful immediate effect on the interpreter. It is a bird, and the interpreter has taken the suggestion of the known visual qualities of a bird and decided they are looking at a bird. Job's a good one. Well done, creative, and well done, interpreter. But hang on, that is not all the meaning, is it? No. The creative, me, is visually communicating more. The bird has more meaning bearing to reveal. But what? As the interpreter, what are we missing? Some of you may see a familiarity in the bird shape to a football team. Some of you may think those birds have a resemblance to Liverpool FC's team emblem, and you will be fairly accurate. The red football team from Liverpool indeed uses a single liver bird, but there are two birds here. The shared iconic shape of the birds mediates an interpretive move from bird, via knowledge of the football team, to liver bird. Again, well done everybody, job's a good one. But hang on, if you all, as interpreters, did not know the contextual knowledge that on Liverpool's riverfront, atop of the port's grand liver building's twin towers, stand two birds, the liver birds, you would never successfully interpret this at all. Up to the point of birds, this semiotic encoding remains at the iconic level of representation and the immediate effect of interpretation. But once the interpreter perceives the same iconic image as something, the representation then, to that interpreter, points them to the liver birds. We say this is indexically representing an existent thing, and now has moved from an immediate to a dynamic effect of moving from an interpretation of birds to liver birds. The rhematic possibility of birds has now moved to what Peirce calls the Dyson level of interpretation, from a semiotically suggested possibility of a could be to a proposal in the interpreter's mind that the birds are liver birds. With the interpreter's lived experiences, a design or illustration may or may not reveal deeper understanding of what is semiotically encoded. Come back next week when we will have an episode on how we can semiotically encode for a dynamic effect. P.S. My family are all Evertonian supporters. At the end of the last episode, we were on a semiotic encoding cliffhanger. The discussion on the effects of interpretation of a semiotic sign on an interpreter hung on what Scott's described as a sugly peg, meaning a precarious situation. Interpretation of something that has been designed or illustrated either only being partly understood or more meaning being interpreted to enrich further understanding. The semiotic equivalent of a sugly peg is whether, on the strength of the creator's representation decisions, the target audience can move from an immediate state to a dynamic state of interpretation. What this means in designer-centric language is whether the target audience can, based on their own lived experience and contextual knowledge, visually understand that one thing means something else, semiotically speaking. Creatives cannot assume. That is why applying semiosis helps. Wait a minute, I hear some of you shout at the screen. What now? We're treading old ground here, but if you draw a panda concept with the idea that just because as a creative you know what a panda looks like, everyone will see the panda representation and understand it is a drawing of a panda interpretation. You will be congratulated on how well you draw pandas. But if not everyone knows what a panda is, then they will never interpret what they see as a panda. In their lived experience and contextual knowledge, they do not have any experience of pandas. Now, substitute the concept of panda with whatever you need to visually communicate. So how can creators overcome this problem? Well, in Season 2's episodes, I explored semiotic representation and target audiences' lived experiences. What we are really exploring here, in the context of semiotic encoding of meaning and the successful interpretation of that meaning, is visually helping the audience to the intended meaning. This semiotic facilitation of a target audience's understanding of what they see to enable the audience to extract as much intended meaning as they can from the visual communication relies on what the audience is likely to interpret. The example I began to use last week was Semiosis 101's parent Scout brand's visual identity. I used this logo to demonstrate this interpretive cliffhanger of either realising the two birds were just birds or whether an audience could interpret live birds from the representation. This is the current Semiosis 101 interpretive sugly peg, the moment between an immediate or dynamic effect on interpretation. What do I mean? Well, when you examine the Scout logo in its design, some of you out there will just see two bird shapes. Some of you will recognise they are live birds. Some of you may not even see the shapes as birds. You will all know which you are. If you are the latter, then the semiotic encoded sign has not been perceived. The semiotic sign action has not been triggered. The semiotic sign lies dormant. But the meaning-bearing visual entity is there in plain sight, but not perceived as something. If you are the former, the effect of the visual language used and the aesthetic decisions taken to visualize the two birds in the logo is what Peirce refers to as an immediate effect on the interpretation. If you see birds, the sign action has begun. If you see the two birds and recognize them as live birds, then the semiotic effect of its representation on you has moved from immediate to dynamic. You have been visually mediated to move from a possibility to a proposition, from possible birds to probable live birds. The semiotic representation has had the effect on the interpreter who, in their lived experience, have knowledge and experience of the concept of live birds. You can name them. The iconic visual communication building blocks of swirling grid marks composed into a certain pattern of these shapes suggest birds, then the shape of particular birds, live birds. This triggering of more contextual meaning that enriches the understanding is now at an indexical level of representation. In Peircean terms, perception has moved from firstness to secondness and from romantic to distant levels of interpretation. It has mediated interpretation into a proposal to those who know. The interpretation is now this thing. Notice I stated this as those who know. Those who, in their lived experience, know of the liver birds of Liverpool can interpret the image at a deeper level of visually communicated meaning. Those who have never heard of liver birds can still interpret some meaning of two red birds from the same image. One set of interpreters will have a deeper understanding of what they see than the other set of interpreters. Those who know have been semiotically mediated to the liver bird interpretation. In the image that others only can interpret as birds, there are visually encoded iconic marks, shapes and colours that reinforce the concept of liver birds rather than parrots or eagles or ostriches. So before we move on to conclude this episode, let us quickly summarise what this means to creatives. One image, an interpreter, aesthetic decisions, encoded semiotic signs. Three possibilities for the semiotic sign action effect of the representation, two birds, of the concept, liver birds, on the interpretation. A. No perception of semiotic sign action. B. A perception of two red bird shapes. C. A perception of two liver birds. The effect on the interpretation is dependent on the representation and interpretation, upon the creator's ability and the target audience's lived experiences. Successful semiotic encoding is dependent on the how and what context. How to select the appropriate visual language and make appropriate aesthetic decisions in designing or illustrating. What will the target audience understand from what is represented? Semiosis helps the creator connect the how and what into successful visual communication. Let us put this into clearer examples. A. No perception of semiotic sign action. Nothing in the visual entity is perceived as meaning bearing. It is just perceived at face value. The audience cannot interpret two bird shapes amongst the lines, colours and shapes in the image. Why is this? If the creator's visual language and aesthetic decisions are too stylized, any encoded semiotic sign action may not be perceived. If the representation is also too realistic, any connotational meaning could be lost by a simple denotational interpretation. This is a beautifully realistic drawing of cormorants. Liver birds are purely fictional birds, just like a phoenix, but are thought to be based on cormorants. Any encoded iconic representations to trigger familiarity of and resemblance to qualities that are in the lived experiences of target audience have not been perceived as something. B. A perception of two red bird shapes. The semiotic sign action is triggered. The audience has enough lived experience to interpret the iconic shapes as two red birds. The semiotic encoding in the creator's visual language and aesthetic decisions sufficiently visually communicate bird shapes. This means that the semiotic encoding has had an immediate interpretive effect on the interpreter and put the concept of birds in the minds of the audience. C. A perception of two liver birds. The interpretation of two red birds is a successful interpretation, but if the full concept to communicate is Liverpool or Scouse, the image still has more meaning bearing in the representation to interpret. While the semiotic sign action has been triggered, the audience has more contextual knowledge within their lived experience to interpret further meaning from the image. From the iconic two red bird shapes, the dynamic effect of ensuring the shapes put in the mind of the audience the concept of liver birds is mediated by how hard the shapes suggest one type of bird over another type. Within semiotic encoding, the skill is to first understand what the audience may already know, what visual qualities can this knowledge suggest, and how can you, as a creative, effectively use these iconic building blocks. I said in an earlier episode that this is not rocket science. Applying semiosis is easier than you think once you align it to your existing creative practice. This is why Semiosis 101 is crucial. Pearce cannot be directly read as a creative how-to guide. Come back next week when we will explore how to dynamically mediate effective visual communication. How can the audience help the creative? Firstly, this is a symbiotic relationship, a win-win-win communicational situation. If the semiotic representation of a concept benefits the client, then its interpretation must also benefit the target audience. If the semiotic interpretation of a concept's representation has a benefit to the target audience, then the intent behind the visual communication must also be actionable. The creative's aesthetic, the designed or illustrated visual entity, is a facilitation and not a destination. Remember, in past episodes, I have already stated visual communication is not passive. As design professor Jorge Frascara argues, visual communication design, graphic design and illustration is a facilitator of behavioural change. Visual communication is proactive. Semiosis, semiotic sign action, is a pragmatic theory that can be applied to enhance the effectiveness of visual communication. In the recent episodes, we have focused on the effects on interpretation by semiotic science. Peirce's semiotic theory is predicated on the interaction between three states of sign action. So before we proceed, as a quick recap, let us just consider what these triadic threes, interactions and interrelationships are. At a macro level of application of semiosis into visual communication design, we have the interrelationship between a client, the creative, and a target audience. The client needs the audience to take some action. Read this, understand that, go here, buy this, do that, etc. The creative, whether a designer or an illustrator, is commissioned to facilitate this from a client's brief through the visual communication work they produce. But gone are the days, if they ever existed, when a creative designs a buy beans poster and the audience passively buys beans. We are not discussing psychologically visually manipulating the target audience here. Semiotic sign action, or semiosis as Peirce names it, is neutral in the intent behind visual communication. As the semiotic theory, semiosis is concerned with the micro level of perception and communication by the encoding of semiotic signs. No, not signage. Its sign action power to communicate concepts is predicated on a determination flow. The semiotic determination flow in Semiosis 101 design-centric terms is between the concept, its representation, and then interpretation. Peirce uses more obtuse terms instead of these design-centric terms. Object, concept, representative, representation, interpretant, interpretation. Let me quickly put Peirce's determination flow back into design-centric contexts. In visual communication, semiosis is a flow of encoded semiotic signs as meaning-bearing visual entity signs that carry connotational meaning. This involves the audience as a communicational partner. The semiotic determination flow can be understood across the macro or micro levels of what illustrators and designers do in their professional work. When I describe an illustration or design as a meaning-bearing entity, I am describing its communicational power as both a complete artifact, e.g. image, magazine, book, poster, etc., and at the level of the marks, shapes, colours, etc. that a creative uses to design or illustrate it. Every communication building block a creative uses has the capability to be meaning-bearing. This fact is important. Miscommunications can be unintentionally made. One thing can be misinterpreted as something not intended. Semiosis offers creatives the semiotic framework to reduce that risk. It is in this power of threes that semiosis can help creatives as this power goes deeper below the semiotic determination flow. At each stage in the sign action, the act of semiosis is triggered and facilitated across three further levels. What I mean by this is that Peirce's semiosis is not just bish bash bosh results. Semiosis is not simply concept, representation, interpretation. Each of those three steps has three levels underpinning each step's effectiveness. The semiotic determination flow between a client's concepts to be visually communicated, how the creator chooses to visually represent that concept, i.e. to semiotically encode meaning into the visuals to connotatively communicate the concept, ultimately has to rely on interpretation by the target audience to extract that connotative meaning. If successfully facilitated, the target audience will gain understanding of the concept. This is far richer and more perceptually subtle than buy beans. How can this communication be structured? The concept has three semiotic levels, from simple to complex, to aid its communication. So do the representation and interpretation. In seasons 1 and 2, we have focused on the three semiotic levels of representation of a concept. These are iconic representation, indexical representation, and symbolic representation. We will cover the three levels of communication of the concept in season 4 in more depth, but the terms Peirce uses to describe their simple to complex power are quasi-sign, sin-sign, legi-sign. I only name check these three terms here as a teaser. If you want to watch season 4 episodes many months before they appear on YouTube, subscribe on Semiosis 101's Patreon and become a named Semiosis 101 producer. This now leaves us with three levels of how the interpretation is structured. From simple to complex, Peirce names the three levels interpretation is effective as ream, dissent, and argument. Yes, I know. I lead you creators to an exciting point of new knowledge, a liminal point where your creative mindset is on the verge of discovering a new point of view, and then Peirce self-sabotages our advancement with more obtuse terminology. Never fear, Semiosis 1 is here. Let us translate what he means in designer-centric terms. Ream, the lower state of possibilities to aid the audience to perceive the semiotic sign. Dissent, the middle state that uses the semiotic representation to pose the intended interpretation to the audience. Argument, the higher state of interpretation that uses the semiotic sign action to define the interpretation. Let us now end this episode in drilling down to exactly how these are relevant to creatives. Over the seasons, regular viewers will realise that Peirce offers a rich seam of new creative knowledge despite his terminology. When I first encountered these terms, I was like many of you right now, completely poleaxed. What now? Etc. Peircean scholars such as Professor Tony Jappi helped to break the obtuse language into terms I could begin to parse into creative practice terms. Semiosis 101 is now here to do this more directly for you creatives. Always pay it forward. So, what in damnation is a ream, a dissent, and having an argument got to do with semiotically encoding meaning into designs and illustrations? If you look back to what we already know about semiotic representation of a concept, iconic representation is about resemblances, qualities, and familiarity. This is a responsibility of the creative to encode. So if at the lowest level of semiotically encoding representation of a concept is predicated on basic building blocks of recognition, then a romantic level of interpretation is the basic effect of that encoding on the audience. A semiotic sign must first be visually perceived as meaning bearing to move from a dormant state to begin its sign action, semiosis. Once perceived as meaning bearing, the iconic elements of lines, marks, shapes, colours, etc. suggest something to the perceiver to interpret. The possibilities of what these iconic lines, marks, shapes, colours, etc. emerge in the mind of the audience is the first perception level of audience's interpretation. This is followed by the perception state where an audience's interpretation confidently moves from the possible romantic level to the proposed dissent level, and then the defined argument level. The audience is key here. Whatever meaning bearing the designer or illustrator encodes into their aesthetic visual language, someone needs to decode it, the target audience. Just as semiosis has three levels of representation sophistication, iconic, indexical, and symbolic, it also has three levels of audience interpretation sophistication, ream, dissent, and argument. The iconic, indexical, and symbolic are in the creator's direct control of how to encode, but the audience has the final say how they decode and interpret what is semiotically represented. The effect of the semiotic representation on its interpretation in the mind of the audience follows three states of immediate effect, dynamic effect, and final effect, all within the determination flow of semiosis. Come back next week when we will wrap up the previous 3 episodes on interpretation before re-examining Peirce's 10 sign classifications. In the last episode, I began to discuss Peirce's other triadic relationships to how meaning is perceived and therefore interpreted. In the next episode, we will begin to re-examine Peirce's 10 classifications of semiotic signs. The sign power of each of these 10 signs, from simple to complex, is predicated on 3 triadic interrelationships I have identified this season. We know semiosis is predicated on the determination flow between the concept, its representation, and then its interpretation. How the concept is represented is powered by iconic, indexical, and symbolic representation. How it is perceived and interpreted is powered as a ream, a dissent, or an argument. More on these next episode. Semiosis' final triad is the power of how the representation is delivered. We can call this a sign vehicle. The quality sign is the most basic delivery of the semiotic representation to the audience. Quality sign is ephemeral. It is a quality and nothing more. Well, not quite. It is a quality that can be weakly meaning bearing. It is on the edge of perception, on the periphery of consciousness, which vanishes when perceived. What I mean is, contextually, a quality can semiotically kickstart communication of meaning through a perception it is familiar. Quick caveat, we are discussing semiotic science and not signage, okay? Good, because I am about to reference signage here. In danger signage, the colour red is often used as socioculturally we identify red with danger. Red is red. In other contexts, red can mean many other things. In danger signage, the application of red evokes a sense of danger. That is a quality sign. The next two semiotic sign vehicle levels are a synth sign and a legi sign. In episode 3.6, I promised to unpack these two terms, so here we are 8 episodes later. A synth sign is the middle level of delivering the semiotic sign, and legi sign is the highest level. By examining the root in each level, quali, syn and legi sign, we can see the perception levels. A quali sign is in the perception state of firstness, a state of possibilities, familiarities and resemblances. A synth sign is in the perception state of secondness, a state of probabilities, proposals and mediation. A legi sign is in the perception state of thirdness, a state of generality, of agreements and interpretation. A synth sign is a one-off delivery of meaning bearing. A legi sign is more of a generally agreed delivery. Syn as in single, legi as in law. Think on this. Quali as in quality, syn as in single, legi as in law. Those of you who are Semiosis 101 regulars will already be aware that semiotic signs are not tangible things but are encoded meaning bearing. Therefore, in one moment, a semiotic sign can be dormant and in the next, active. A semiotic sign can be unperceived and then perceived. In context A, a blob can be perceived as an animal ear, but in context B, a blob can be a leg or a plane or a skyscraper or anything. The quality of a blob may semiotically suggest an ear or a leg, but a blob is a blob. Its shape may change, suggesting other qualities. These quali-sign suggestions are weak and interpretations can be varied. A shape of an eye has a round quality. To visually communicate an eye, different shapes are used to suggest iris, cornea, pupil, reflections, etc. Different colour qualities are used to suggest eye variations, and composition of these shapes suggest where the eye is looking. These are just shapes, independent of whatever technique is used to visualise them. These shapes in different configurations can visualise lots of other things too. Can you see where I'm going with this? In one configuration, these various shapes define an eye. This is what Peirce defines as a synth sign. The individual shapes that could also form many other things if configured differently form a single element in an image, or as an image, or as a graphic to visually communicate an eye. A syn sign, a single sign vehicle delivering the representation of the concept of an eye. A synth sign which helps the interpreter to interpret an eye. So if a quali sign is a sign vehicle which is an ephemeral semiotic meaning bearing quality, and a synth sign is a single use sign vehicle which is used to visually communicate a thing, then what is a legi sign? Peirce is quite careful in how he defines a legi sign. A legi sign is a law that is a sign. This law is usually established by people. Every conventional sign is a legi sign. It is not a single object, but a general type which it has been agreed shall be significant. A general type which has been agreed? Peircean scholar Professor Tony Jaffe describes a legi sign as depending largely upon personal experience of the world and collateral, that is, independent, knowledge of the concept determining the sign. Consider what you all already know and apply that to legi signs. What do I mean by that? Peirce uses familiar terms such as law and argument when trying to name what semiotically and perceptually happens at the point of interpretation. He is making a specific philosophical and logical point, but again, his terminology is nothing more than obtuse to the creative layperson. We will look at this highest level of triadic sign action in the same way we explored the lowest in episode 3.5. The highest of Peirce's 10 semiotic sign classifications utilizes symbolic representation and argument and is a legisign. We already know symbolic representation employs visual generalities. We know an argument in Peircean terms is nothing more than a general agreement. Can you see where I'm going with this? A legisign is a general expected way of experiencing the semiotic visual communication. Let me make you more comfortable with this. What is a logo? Yes, it represents a brand, an organisation, a business, etc. But what is a logo? We all feel we know what a logo is. So when we see a single graphic mark or a shape, initials, etc., we are happy to assume it could be a logo. Every logo is different. They look different. But we still know each one is a logo. Logos are meaning bearing. They convey meaning through a simple visual identity. Logos deliver much more meaning once recognised as such that on its own it cannot visually bear. Can you see where I'm going with this? Apply that same thinking to Peirce's legisign. Am I saying a logo is a legisign? Let us not get bogged down in analogy. As I stated in Season 2, Episode 2.1, semiotic signs are not signage, but signage uses semiotics. I'm just trying to reset your perceptual thinking here. A legisign is just a delivery method for the semiotic sign. If a quality is a weak and ephemeral meaning-bearing vehicle, qualisign, and a single configuration of shapes, marks, etc. is a one-off meaning-bearing vehicle, synsign, then a legisign is a generally accepted sign vehicle that the target audience will expect. A logo is just one example of how legisigns are experienced without thinking. Also, consider other things you do not notice, such as wayfinding or the app screen on your devices, or in the analog world, the expectation of where to open a packet. Everything you design or illustrate has visual communication embedded within it. The meaning-bearing visual elements should lead to the intended meaning and not against it. The managing of perception is how semiosis aids you creatives. In design, we can describe what and how we design through a variety of different theoretical lenses. This episode just helps you frame how semiotic sign action can also benefit your successes through mindfully considering interpretation. We expanded on how semiotic representation can be delivered through three sign vehicles of qualisigns, synsigns, and legisigns. We will return to these next week when we will spend 3 episodes exploring in more detail Peirce's 10 semiotic sign classifications, from simple to complex. You will gain a clearer understanding how all of Peirce's 3 triads of sign action power interplay to enhance your visual communication skills. I am Dave Wood, a design educator and researcher, a published design author, and I've worked commercially as both a freelance illustrator and graphic designer. The guy behind the theory, Charles Sanders Peirce, was a philosopher, a mathematician, and a theorist. But he was not a creative. Each week on this Scout Scott Semiosis 101 YouTube channel, I will post at least one free 10-minute explainer episode on an aspect of Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory. Each free YouTube episode features a take-home piece of applicable semiotic theory, and they do interconnect to build up your understanding of semiosis. Each free Semiosis 101 YouTube 10-minute episode will use design-centric terms instead of theoretical language. As well as the free YouTube episodes, I have 2 further Semiosis 101 semiotic resources you can subscribe to. Semiosis 101 producer roles are now available on Patreon. If you take out a paid Patreon Semiosis 101 patronage, you will get access to all the future season episodes months before they get published on YouTube. As a Patreon Semiosis 101 patron, you will automatically become a Semiosis 101 producer and get a name credit on all future YouTube episodes. Depending on which of the 4 producer tiers you choose, you will also get access to behind the scenes insights, cool Semiosis 101 Patreon merchandise, and other goodies for Semiosis 101 to continue making semiotic episodes. As a Patreon Semiosis 101 producer, you will be financially supporting the sustainable future of Semiosis 101 to keep explaining Peirce's semiotic theory. To become a Patreon Semiosis 101 producer, the link is in the description. I have a written semiotic resource available on the Semiosis 101 Substack. Here I have semiotic support materials for both free and paid Substack subscribers. There are full annotated reading lists, episode transcripts, 5-minute semiotic reads, plus other goodies and exclusive Semiosis 101 Substack merchandise. The Substack link is in the description. As a fellow creative and a published design author, I also have a link in the description to my main Scout Scott website. If you're interested in reading my Semiotic Rosetta Stone academic writing, then you can visit my academia.edu link in the description. Any other books on Persian semiotics or design I've mentioned in the episodes are also listed in the description. Check them out too. Thanks for watching. Check out the other Semiosis 101 episodes, like and share them with your friends. And hit the bell and subscribe buttons to be notified when next week's free Semiosis 101 episode is published. You can also follow Semiosis 101 on the socials for updates. It is at Semiosis 101 on Instagram and Threads. See you all again next week for more Semiosis 101 to help illustrators and designers to enhance your visual communication skills.